sponsoring the event today. And then we have Richard Borger. Richard runs a technology division at Mohawk College. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about his program, his experience with visualization, digital twins, and kind of a project that he's done to capture his entire campus. The next speaker will be Mark Scott, who's the head facility manager for Ohio State University. We're going to dig in a little deeper into some different technologies with BIM and software workflows, and he's got a lot of cool things to share from that side. So two of our speakers will be on the facility and engineering side of the university perspective. And then we're going to get a perspective from security from J. Kelly Stewart, who is a security consultant and does a lot of work through ASIS. And then also from a law enforcement perspective from Jacob Atkins. Real quick about myself, I got a background in 3D LiDAR, photogrammetry, and geospatial. I'm about 10 years working in this space. And I've been running a software company called Visual Plan, which produces visual twins and hosts all sorts of visual data. So we look at ourselves to either be or become a platform for collaboration and planning, and to host things all CAD and all things 3D. So I want to introduce a few terms that not everyone on this call might be familiar with. Even this term digital twin is not as common. Some people may use the word reality capture, but what digital twin is a digital replica or a carbon copy of, in our perspective, it's going to be a physical structure, building, or space, but it can be processes, it can be systems and other things like that. And why the digital twin is so important is we use the digital twin to be able to visit and simulate and plan, design, and collaborate around what that structure or entity or process is, and how we can document change and adapt and do this much more efficiently. Another term that's going to be brought up quite a bit through this presentation is BIM, which means Building Information Modeling, which is a process of creating 3D models and attaching intelligent information properties for each of these objects so that it can be accessed in a more visual way. And it's a very relevant part of our conversation, especially in the new construction and engineering and design phases of managing facilities. And then when that information is handed over to existing facilities, there's going to be quite a few facility managers from universities on this call today. How do we work with that data effectively so that it's not stuck in engineering's hands on a desktop and not accessed by the wider campus? So we're going to kind of address what challenges can be solved with digital twins and kind of reflect on the current climate with COVID and protests and these other elements that are going on right now. So a couple other quick things. It sounds like my presentation wasn't on full screen, so I'm just going to kick it back here. I think today a lot of us are living in a world of data sharing through Dropbox or other file format or file sharing programs. So the problem with this is we're trying to make sense of 3D environments from 2D still images and CAD drawings that are outdated and typically inaccurate. And it's a challenge to be able to do our jobs, whether we're being in a design or engineering or system integrator or with existing facilities. And typically when we get something like this, it's great to get some information, but it's not the complete picture. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot to be answered. So what we typically need to do is let's go to the job site. Let's go check it out. We need to see it, we need to verify, we need to validate, because right now we're speculating. We're going to make assumptions. And even the orientation is really difficult to do from this perspective. So kind of moving from this stage into, a more relevant 3D environments, how can digital twins and 360 information that can be synced and that can be looked at side by side, that we can walk through virtually, that we can augment reality and show elements from a design into elements of an as-is condition, and how do those relate so that when we are looking at a facility, you can make good decisions. And then how do we share that information, through a safe, secure cloud environment so that others can provide feedback, especially those with subject matter expertise or those that are relevant for a project that need to provide that kind of feedback. So, just a quick video showing some elements of digital twin, whether it be a BIM, whether it's showing augmented reality, in this case with HVAC systems or other furniture. There's a lot that can be done virtually without having to be on site. So just kind of summing up, I do see the world in these kind of buckets today where we see a lot of building information done. Some some organizations can be more advanced, like what you're going to see today with Ohio State University, where they have an active BIM program. They're actually laser scanning and creating BIM and updating those models for various aspects of what they do operationally. There's a big investment both in the technology and the time and the upkeep here. But often what we're going to see is the new construction is going to hand these assets over to facilities. And often facilities don't have a good mechanism to share and update it and use that information intelligently. So what happens in facilities is we have a world of CAFM, or computer-aided facility management databases, which is work orders and all these types of information that are organized into kind of maybe a 2D or space based kind of organization hierarchy. So, from here, how do we get this information out to the rest of the people within the organization? And visual plan's a bit of a method to do that. So what happens today is these nice assets are not always accessible, and those that are in security, facilities, or service providers are often stuck with the Dropbox account with limited information and old information. So when we think about digital twins, it can be complex or it can be very simple. We use digital twins every day when we open our phone and we look at Google Street View, and we use it to navigate and to get intelligence so that we make good decisions and we don't waste time. And a lot of what we're going to talk about is relevant to that conversation. And then when we look at this whole world of moving from the design and build stage and having accurate information shared throughout the process, throughout all these levels of stakeholders and who needs to share and add feedback, the digital twin kind of flattens this curve, whereas in traditional terms, we have this struggle from those that are architects and designers having information at the beginning of the project, construction taking over, and the construction contractors are going to have all the information and changes ongoing through a construction project. And then again, that information is dumped again onto facilities, and then what comes next is, facilities either don't know what to do with the information, or may take the information and be able to get it in a consumable format. But often there are these pain points of having to revisit and resurvey and resurvey. So that's kind of the way I want to kind of set up the conversation and start to think of those that are responsible for a facility and who needs to be accessing information, and also thinking about the complexity of how COVID really makes it much more difficult to get on site. Do we need to have security checks, and do we need to be tested, and what's the process and procedure to be on site? Do we have PPE? And because of the complexity of that, is there a better way? Can we do things virtually instead? And in some cases, projects are going to be just halted completely. So if there's a fast way to capture and share this information and a secure way to send it to those that are responsible for facilities, I believe it has a lot of value. And at that point, I'm going to change the conversation over to Richard Borger at Mohawk College. And Richard, if you want to introduce yourself and your program, we'd be excited to hear what you have to say.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kelly. So as Kelly said, I am actually a faculty member at Mohawk College down here in Hamilton. Our college is located, for those of you who aren't familiar with Ontario quite as much, we're located about 45 minutes south of Toronto, just across Lake Ontario. And we have programs at the college ranging from healthcare to engineering technology, business through to skilled trades and apprenticeship. So we serve as a community college, we serve a wide range of students for a wide need of programs. Our campus has over 30,000 students. We have 3 main campuses located throughout the city. And then we have a couple of satellite learning hubs, including our newest one at the Hamilton International Airport. I've included the bottom bullet there that we rank top 10 in all of our Canadian colleges, because that really actually ties into what brought us here today. And actually, Kelly, if you want to advance to the next slide.
Sure.
Myself and my colleague, Matt Shelley, actually, we started off doing applied research in unmanned and remote sensing about 3 years ago. We've had a fair amount of success, and I'll show kind of our main areas of focus on the research in the next slide. But Matt and I actually, we started doing this 3 years ago. We started with essentially two major areas of focus. One was terrestrial LiDAR and photogrammetry. So basically data capture and manipulation to build digital twins to address a lot of the things that Kelly was talking about, that ease of collecting information and sharing that to reduce the need for on-site visits. And in addition to that, we deal with a lot of aerial unmanned systems under our past technology, our past technology umbrella. So we have we do from there, we run the range from our past threat detection on the security end right through to drone mounted LiDAR and photogrammetry and essentially the geospatial world that can be collected and mapped using drones. The terrestrial LiDAR and photogrammetry has actually been a really interesting portfolio for us, especially over the last few months with the pandemic, because we were working with a number of industry partners under our one of the tenets of our strategic plan, which was to essentially focus on applied research and generate those industry partnerships. We've been working on that for a number of years to create virtual twins or digital twins of a lot of different sites around the city at our industry partner sites. And it actually really came to head, the benefits of it during the pandemic protocols that we're seeing here in Southern Ontario. So our introduction to visual plan actually came through our terrestrial LiDAR and photogrammetry portfolio. And we've been working with Kelly for just over a year now and had a lot of success with it. And I'd like to share some of that success with you today. So the first partner that we worked with was actually ArcelorMittal Dofasco. They are Canada's largest steel producer, and actually they're located about 15 minutes from our campus. Biggest private sector employer in Hamilton, and they ship about 4.5 million net tons of steel each year. So they do a lot of steel production, and they know exactly what they're doing. We met with their engineering team as soon as we heard about this visual plan software and said, look, we can create visual twins or virtual twins of your facilities using a software called Visual Plan. And we outlined the benefits and our goals for it. And I'll address those as we go through the next few slides. So the first one that we recognized was the environment that steel is made in is actually a fairly hazardous environment. There's a lot of dangerous points for employees, and this becomes a real issue when it for two reasons: for access to contractors, but also for training for new employees. There's a lot of hazards that might not be readily identifiable. I mean, this photo here is pretty straightforward. You can see we've got, this is an image captured on the floor of the blast furnace. You can see the hot metal, but you don't know of all the other hazards that are around on the blast furnace on the cast house floor. So the easy reason for us to get in and do some of the scanning in these hazardous environments was to reduce the hazard to new employees and therefore increase the health and safety performance of the company. However, while we were there's actually a whole bunch of other things that we were able to accomplish. So this photo here doesn't maybe look like a lot, but if I were to situate this, we were actually in a stock house. We're 2 stories underground. It took a safety escort for us to get down there. We had to lock out, so just in the back of the screen, you can actually see some energized rail tracks. So those are highly energized. I think they're 22,000 volts rail tracks for the stock car. There's radiation from some of the sensors in the shakers to detect material levels inside that stock house. And in order for contractors to get down there to do any sort of maintenance work or new deployment of new tech, they have to go through all these shutdowns and lockouts, and sometimes they're doing that even just for measurements. So now that we had started this process of creating a digital twin, it became apparent that there's a lot of other aspects we can use this digital twin for, and being able to take measurements and being able to give that sense of place to contractors even before they set foot on site became really apparent as we were doing, as we were building this digital twin of the facilities. In addition to that, we were, if you go back one screen there, Kelly, in addition to that, we were actually able to almost reduce or significantly actually reduce costs for bidding. So as opposed to going in for a cost plus type tender, we were able to snip out sections of the scan and send that out as a bit part of the bid package for any of the contractors bidding on the job. So they knew exactly what they were getting into. I mean, as long as it wasn't subsurface. But we were able to actually give them the as-built conditions and show, look, here's where your conduit is, here's where all your services run. Tell us exactly what the job is going to cost, as opposed to having to run a cost plus type scenario. So it was a huge safety benefit for the company as we were running or being able to use that digital twin. On the next screen that Kelly showed there, you can see a green line along that at ArcelorMittal Dofasco. That's referred to as the green mile. This is the stripe, the safety, if you will. So if there's any incident on the blast furnace, employees are told just follow the green line. It's the quickest and shortest route to the marshalling point in case of an emergency. So we were able to do two things with the visual plan software. We were able to audit that the effectiveness of that green paint from a variety of locations. So as opposed to just having somebody walk it and say, yep, it's good enough, we were able to actually walk through various positions and say, hey, you know what, that line needs to be painted, or in this case, it needs to be put up on the wall, because when it's on the ground, it gets covered in too much dirt, and it becomes a safety hazard. Or if the lights are out, you can't really see it. So we can actually see this safety protocol actually integrated right into not only the training, but also in some of the safety audits that happen on that site. We are currently working with ArcelorMittal Dofasco and Visual Plan to integrate into their CMMS platform. For those who aren't familiar, that's a computerized maintenance management system. So it's what Kelly referred to as the CAFM, or I think you called it CAFM, Kelly, where you've got facilities management being done through a whole series of work orders and there's a lot of pinch points in that design process or in that operations process. And what we're trying to do is remove those by putting all of those work orders located on 3D model. So if there is an issue that needs to be addressed, it can be dropped right into the 3D model. Work orders can be accepted from the 3D model, and the facilities management team knows exactly where they need to actually go to respond to that issue. So that's stuff that we're working with Kelly on at ArcelorMittal Dofasco. Now, we had so much success with Dofasco that we actually shifted over, and we kind of brought it back in-house. So we sat down with our facilities management team, our security team, and a variety of other stakeholders on campus here, and we said, look, let's scan the campus. We were shut down here in Ontario since March, so March till I want to say the end of June, the campus was pretty much closed down to the public. We had a really incredible opportunity to get on campus while it was fairly quiet and start building a digital twin of the campus. It's funny because we've already had, I mean, we're not even fully completed yet, and we've already had a whole bunch of requests from our design team, because we're doing some renovations on a new building, and are on one of the wings here, and the architectural team can't get on site as regular as they'd like to. So what they want to do is actually take sections of the digital twin that we've created, even if it's not fully polished, and be able to pass it on to the architectural design team so that they can actually get an idea of how the buildings are put together. So it's a really cool application, and we're excited to see that kind of uptake on campus. So that was an expected, but not maybe quite as we weren't expecting it to be quite as demanding right away off the go. So we have envisioned being able to use our digital twin for facilities management response, and a lot through the embedded annotations that visual plan permits. So we actually scanned all the rooms, including our utility rooms, where we have all of our fuse panels and connection points. And Kelly, you can see that on the next screen there. And what we're able to do actually is embed annotations on each of those fuse panels, indicating which circuits they feed. So rather than having someone trying to figure out on a drawing, okay, well, which circuit is which, and try and shut it off. I mean, for those who are involved in facilities management, you know that it's usually a nightmare with some of these older buildings. The as-built conditions never match the drawn conditions. And we're actually able to go in and clear all of that up by using the annotations embedded in Visual Plan. In addition to that, Visual Plan has an incredible relation with security, and a lot of our spaces on campus are very wide open. with a lot of access points. So I've taken this image, I grabbed it out of the tour of the building that we created. You can see we've got a Scotiabank on campus, and it's at the junction of 4 major hallways as well as a staircase coming up from another level. I don't live in the world of security response, but we've been told by the security teams on campus that do that, having the ability to actually see the site in case of an incident and to actually, walk through as a responding officer to a scene and see what are the methods of ingress and egress to that particular space are invaluable. And we've already had a fairly positive response from our security management team on campus, just being able to see those different sites. A unexpected actually benefit of having visual plan was insurance claims. So if there was ever an incident, I've shown here, this is our 3D printing studio. We have, millions of dollars worth of equipment in this studio. And if there ever was an incident, we could actually go to the insurance adjusters and say, hey, look, this is the equipment we have in our room. Here's, you can see exactly what's there other than what's in the cupboard, but you can see all the big pieces of stuff that's on site. And we can actually, augment our claim to be a more appropriate claim for any insurance purposes. Our insurance team is actually anticipating being able to see reductions in premiums because of having there's less guesswork in any of the claims that will be put in. So as a whole, we've actually seen an incredible response on campus from our teams here in facilities management, security response, marketing, and you name it, like across the board. We've seen a ton of applications on campus. And I'd actually like to wrap up my bit of the presentation talking about some of the benefits and challenges and future opportunities of working with Visual Plan. Big thing for us was the quick capture rate. We were able to capture 650,000 square feet of a campus in very short order. I think we had maybe about 70 hours of time. And that's, in and out of classrooms and prepping the space and getting it set up. So it was a very quick capture rate. In addition to that, we didn't have to buy a specific camera. We were able to use some of our 360 cameras that we already had in inventory and be able to do our data capture. On the technical support side, Kelly and his team are exceptional when it comes to providing technical support and being able to respond and design changes or software changes based on industry feedback. And that's been a real win for us when it comes to Visual Plan as a company. Some of the challenges, though, it actually does lead to one of the challenges, is because they respond so quickly to industry feedback, there is a bit of a dynamic platform. And I mean, Kelly and his team do a really good job of managing those changes, but there are some instances where I log in from one day to the next and there's been an interface change, and it just takes a minute or two to sort out. The software does struggle with long spaces, and especially those with relatively homogeneous surfaces, but I've been told by Kelly that that's about to change with some of the new technology integrations that they've got on their platform. In summary, I guess, Kelly, I'll sum up here. We're really excited to be working with Visual Plan. We have a number of other opportunities that we're looking to engage in, including, we have a shared campus with a local university. We're looking to help with some of their security design and assessment. There's a nuclear reactor within 15 minutes of campus, one of the Canada's, or Ontario's anyway, busiest port. We've got an international airport, all of that within 10 or 15 minutes of the campus. And we're starting to see interest from a security planning and facilities management point. And we anticipate that's probably where we'll end up heading. So I'll wrap up my bit of a spiel there. And Kelly, thank you very much for allowing me to participate today.
Yes, thanks very much, Richard. I want to make sure we clarify one thing, what you're doing here with your program. It's an actual curriculum and course where you're taking students on site to these industries and really getting firsthand real industry experience, which I think is absolutely awesome. And even in the case with working with your existing facilities, you're creating a value within your current university environment. And I think that your students are going to come out quite skilled and have good job opportunities as a result. So thank you. And we're going to change the conversation now to Mark Scott. So again, Mark is managing a massive campus. He has a very mature program in terms of working with BIM and point cloud. So I'm going to let Mark introduce himself and talk to us a little bit about his program and maybe kind of give us some insight on where his pains and where his challenges are, what keeps him up at night, and what he would recommend to others on the call here if they're looking at 3D technologies and what makes sense.
And I just want to also just point out any questions or anything, please post those in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to those.
Thanks, Brett. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, so my name's Mark Scott. I am from the Ohio State University, right? And I appreciate the promotion, Kelly. I am one of many people that work facilities at Ohio State, so I'm not the facilities guy at Ohio State. Yeah, we have, I think, somewhere around 32, 34 million square feet of space on campus, and I really control somewhere around 2.5 to 3 million, depending on if you're counting corridors, stairwells, and things like that. But I just work for the College of Engineering. So the College of Engineering at Ohio State is huge. We have 300 and some faculty, about 600 and some staff, and somewhere around 9,000 students at any particular time. With that, we have other 6 college centers, and we do everything from dealing with, I like to call it methyl ethyl death in a fume hood research lab where it's BSL-2 or BSL-3 or something crazy, or nuclear reactors in labs, or even an airport where we have 1,200 acre general aviation airport up at the OSU airport. So we have a lot of different facilities that span a lot of different things, in facilities dating all the way back to 1925. So how do I keep track of all of those things? They've been cobbled together, and I've been looking at different ways to do it. So if you look at, if we're looking at things to do, VisualWorks was something that could be something that I could capture a lot of data from and capture it quickly. So we've been using a Faro scanner at this point, and Faro scanner will give me that, if I want sub-millimeter quality resolution, sure, I can do that. But I really don't need that, because as I've found out over the last 6 years of laser scanning and modeling, that I don't need something in sub-millimeter resolution. If it's within an inch or so, it's going to be just fine. And the likelihood that the contractor put in a perfectly straight piece of conduit and the exact dimensions of the way I can draw it and rev it is highly unlikely. So, and I want to use, Revit in the end to give me more than just the model. I really would like something for the B and the I in BIM. VisualWorks can help me get that model put together, though, so that I can get that information out to the guys in the field who can really take advantage of it. And so I've got an office with, several people in it, but what I have found that works the best is undergraduate student architects. They started out years ago, maybe $8.50 an hour, and the industry has found that they're pretty important people once they understand how all this works. I've had to go all the way up to $14 an hour just so I can keep my architects in my office working for me as a student employee. And at that time, we go through probably a 1-month train up, and they work for me for about a year, maybe 2 years at a shot. And they do a great job of being able to model everything in BIM. So right now we've been laser scanning everything. We create a big point cloud. That goes over into Faro Scene. Scene is the software for Faro. We do all the measurements off of that. And then on the other monitor that the students have, they're running Revit. So in Revit, you'll see that we just have a box. That's what we start out with. So the university up on the hill, the castle on the hill, has created the Revit architectural file. And that's what I get. And the two aren't very similar. So I have to figure out how to do renovations, how to manage maintenance, and other types of things that are really indicative of what's on the left picture, whereas the right picture, all I get is a big box. So I need to figure out how to get the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, sewer, all of that stuff put in so I can work through that process. And what I found out is BIM is good, but I think visual plan is going to get me that information that I need to progress on to the next stage. So on the next slide, you'll see that I have a penthouse in Scott Lab on OSU campus. On the left is a picture of what's actually there. On the right are what my students have drawn. So I've been able to take the architectural model that I get from the university that gives me the location of floors, exterior walls, interior doors. Now I'm adding into it all of the different trade models in Revit. So I'm adding in a structural model so I know more of the exact structural pieces that we're working with. I can add in electrical, HVAC, plumbing, fire protection, telecommunications, and all the different trade models that I need when I start to do work and I have to do renovations. I can make all of those Revit models, put those through Navisworks and up into BIM 360 Glue, and that's the picture that I have on the right side. From there, if I need to do modifications, adjustments, models, things like that, I can send those right to an architect or an engineer and say, hey, we need to upgrade an air handler. And this is at least a recent air handler. This one's only vintage 2005. It's only about 15 years old, but I have other models of buildings that are dating all the way back into the 60s. And I'm like, well, how are we going to get an air handler into this space? What is the pathway we can get things in? And being able to draw the model and being able to show folks how that goes in the Revit model or the BIM 360 Glue model, that's one way of doing it. I think visual plan is going to be quicker to pull all that information together. I'll still have to create the BIM models on the right so that I can get maybe some more of the I and the M. I'm learning more about visual plan as we go. And it sounds like there's capabilities in that as well. So I'm excited to hear about that. And as we go on to the next slide, you can see what I really need to do a lot of times is track down systems. So here in BIM 360 Glue, all I've done is remove the architectural. So now the floors have come out. I've pulled out an architectural and a structural model, and I can start tracing my pipes through the system. So looking down from a 4th floor penthouse to 3 to 2 to 1, where there's lots of labs through there. I think this is about 150,000 square feet of research labs, all with single pass air, 100% fresh outside air and exhaust, a lot of electricity for the mechanical and aerospace engineering departments. So there's just a lot that we can pull in, and the advantage is the guys working on the field can see this before they go out there. So
great.
Yep.
Thanks, Mark, for that. You know, it's interesting too. I think we have a current project with an engineering firm. It's this big question on what needs to be physically modeled and what really needs to be just visually validated. And when you get into engineering, absolutely, the model has tremendous value, especially all the properties and the information in that BIM. So that it's easy to access that information by selecting an object and having that at your fingertips. But other aspects, the imagery and whatnot is quite sufficient in adding annotations. So it's I think it's always going to be a blend of technology. No tool does everything. But I appreciate all your experience and feedback on what you're doing over there at Ohio State. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to change the conversation to more of a security perspective, and we invite J. Kelly Stewart on from Newcastle Consulting. Kelly, you can take it from here.
Good afternoon, and again, thank you for letting me participate in this panel. Good afternoon or good morning for wherever you are to everybody. Again, Kelly Stewart. I'm the Managing Director, CEO of Newcastle Consulting. We are a security risk management consultancy. Primarily concentrating on, quite frankly, I'm just going to get into risk assessments. And experiencing going into this whole aspect and why I'm turning the discussion to this is Going to go into 3 perspectives, but I don't hit the slide yet, Kelly. First, understand my background. I started with the federal government with U.S. Secret Service, then I moved into corporate security with various firms, CACI, Deloitte, and recently with Intelsat. And the perspective I want to give you is those experiences with not only using this technology, but also why it's important with each one of these areas. So what I'm going to take an examination of is what I currently do as an A&E security consultant. Also, when I was chief security officer and director of security for a satellite company, we dealt with a lot of these issues that actually Richard and Mark pointed out, but we never had the technology to do so. So this onset of what we're looking at with regard to digital twin helps us, at least from the seat that we're sitting in, and Richard made a testament to that, that security really wants to get into this because it actually allows us to see better perspectives of what we're going to be responding to and what we're going to have to deal with. And that goes also with regard to law enforcement. Next slide, Kelly. So our world, what exactly is the A&E security consultant world? And understanding and knowing that, obviously, some of you already know what that world is from a facility standpoint, but we're also, whenever I'm dealing with a client or wherever we're looking at things, it's always on specifications. How do we write up certain things? What are we looking at with regard to, say, their functional requirements of where they want to put the widgets? And what I mean by widgets is all the security components, those of cameras, card readers, spatial relations, even using concepts such as CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. How does that all get designed and put into, say, the construction drawings, as well as how do we understand, are we actually seeing what we want to see? So when I mention functional requirements, I'm actually asking the client, are you getting what you want to design? So are we fulfilling that aspect of what you want to see? And that where digital twin really plays a huge and important role is understanding that. But before we get to that, what I want to make sure of, everything in the security world starts with, if you're doing it right, a risk assessment process. Now, why do I emphasize this? Because it's the basis of planning. It's the basis of understanding what you have. It's also getting to enlighten you, okay, here's what I currently have. Here's where I need to go. What am I missing? And then also addresses that whole aspects of threats and risks appropriately. So what does Visual Plan do for us? It actually truncates this entire process and truncates it in a very significant way. So if you take a look at what the screen is showing you right now, there's a huge amount of process into each of this aspect that we go into, from identification all the way to evaluation, treatment, and then it continues on for monitoring. The digitization and visualization of a lot of the things that we're doing actually allows us in the security world to meet all these things, because it goes into different areas of what we're trying to capture and what we're trying to do in terms of a design, and also submit that into construction documents. Next slide. So when I'm looking at, and I've had images here, as you can see, of the smart city, where we're going to in the future and where campuses are going. And I got current clients are looking at that. Number one being the U.S. Postal Service, as well as some of the hospitality world. COVID-19 has actually brought us back, but in the same respect, it's allowed us, as Richard mentioned and pointed out, to look and be a little bit more proactive in designing what we have in terms of structure, where we want to go in terms of the design, and what does that all look like. It also allows us, well, we know we're going to have to go in advance and scale things accordingly, but what is that going to look like 5, 10 years down the road? Now, with the A&E world, what exactly do consultants do? So what I wanted to mention is we're integrated with those design teams. We help them along with project management. We also look at the technology that's going to go into the design. So when we're looking at any kind of CAD, Revit, or BIM modeling, a lot of those aspects from a security perspective are going to be plopped into that nomenclature, and we assist in doing that. Now, when we're looking at that kind of world, what are we showing the architects, the engineers, and also the client? How are we developing those certain things? What we're looking at is see these views. So these views are from certain clients that I have. And what we're trying to demonstrate to them is this is the kind of virtual 3D view you're seeing with regard to your particular space. Now, with that space, are you capturing everything that you want to capture given the device that you have? Now, it also allows us to specify device real specifically, because each device has its own way and specification of what it can and cannot do. So what this allows us to do is actually see it in real, not so much real time, but in the 3D imagery of, okay, this is what I'm going to get. This is what I'm going to see. And digital twin helps that immensely. Now, truth be told, I was very much an early adopter of this technology of photogrammetry. Now, for me, from my world, what I always push is the whole aspect of virtual risk assessments. Now, what is a virtual risk assessment? Essentially, you're at a remote location using the software at hand, and you're enabling the client to go around the space that they want to get done in such a fashion and direct them on how they do things. Now, at one point in time, this was very much pie in the sky concept. And I'll point out to that when we get to my CSO role. But the whole point of this here, when we're in the consultants world of A&E, it's the aspect of how do we design things properly, and taking that entire schedule that you have and truncating it and making it a little bit more effective and efficient. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is have an effective not only process, but also an operation, because we're trying to get it operationally effective and ready, as you see here in the lower left-hand side of the screen. The control center, or the meat and bones of where security is and how they look and perceive things, they have to detect it. They want to make sure the device is working well. And when they're detecting it, they're also assessing, okay, I'm seeing this. Now I want to go out and respond to whatever is happening. So this aspect of design helps immensely in terms of our world and what we're trying to communicate to the client, as well as to the other folks who doing the design work. Next slide, please. So again, where I wanted to emphasize is it's a process. And the process for us is how we go from design to response. So when we're looking at visualization, where we're benefiting, quite frankly, is, as you see, it's plan, implement, operate, study. And that's essentially, those four elements contain everything that we want to do, because not only are we capturing a digital picture of the area that we're trying to design and whatever we're trying to do, or the campus, but then how do we implement properly? And then once the implementation or design aspects are done, then okay, we're into operation. The digital twin features and the aspects that I use with it, I can use for training purposes. I can use for simulation. I can drop in policies and procedures, as well as other pieces of information that are critical to helping students or even organizations understand what they have, what they can do with it. Now they can be more efficient and effective of going forward. And then at the end, it's also about analyzing and understanding, okay, how can we improve things? Next slide. So let me change my hat from a consultant to now I'm in the world of a chief security officer. And that is essentially the person who's in charge of all the security for your organization, your campus, however you may look at it. And so what are we looking at exactly from that position? We're actually looking at high-level risks. How does those risks affect what we do, not only with what we're charged with, but also for the functioning business aspects of whatever entity, whether it be a campus entity or a corporation. Each security officer is going to look at these things. Because why? Why is this critically important? Because this is what drives us to help with not only the duty of care, meaning the safety and security of the folks who exist on that space, but also ensure that the business or the university thrives. And they thrives that none of the safety and security issues are ever going to affect them in any manner, but we're prepared and we're planned properly. So, okay, so looking at it from this perspective, what do we get into? We get into the master planning and crisis planning. Now, let me give you a little description. So I was chief security officer for a company called Intelsat, which dealt with satellite communications. And we had 30 campuses around the world, approximately 100 square acres apiece. And you're dealing with, how do I deal with all of that, assess all of that, understand what my threat element is, and then deal with the protection of putting in the right components and the right things to ensure safety and security, while at the same time being able to plan properly and plan for the event of, say, a crisis. Now, let's take the pandemic as part of one of those threats. So in my background, we went through this whole pandemic crisis planning when we had H1N1. Now, did it prepare us for what we're going through right now? Not exactly, but a lot of those planning aspects were in place. So when you're looking at it from your chief security officer perspective, you're wanting to know, okay, what kind of conditions am I going to have to deal with? How am I going to train and make sure people are aware of what we have? And then what am I going to do in terms of response in the event anything happens? What digital twin allows us to do is actually simulate that entire thing. Now, back in these days, I wish I had that technology because it would have been real helpful in order to do things a lot more efficiently and effectively. Were we able to plan? Sure we were, but it was very archaic, very paper intensive, and the communication pieces weren't exactly up to speed. So when you're orienting and looking at folks in terms of understanding design, you want to be able to make them more aware. Now, if you see here on kind of faded out a little bit on the right-hand part of your screen, it says Intelsat 360. Now, I stood this up for our department so you could have a very good understanding of what we're doing, how we're doing it. But again, this is going back to, say, 2013, 2012, 2010, when technology still was at its infancy with regard to this. And this photogrammetry aspect wasn't around yet. So you're dealing with, okay, how do I deal with the process? The whole point is here, as technology evolves and as these things come into play, it makes great sense. And as Richard and Mark have pointed out, it just helps out with the understanding of what you're going to look at things and truncates that process and makes it more effective. Next slide, please. So one other thing I wanted to mention when you're in this seat, you're also dealing with compliance issues. A lot of my clients in the banking industry, also within hospitality, they all deal with compliance. So where does Digital Twin help you with that? Well, as we've already pointed out, you're able to hit these various things with regard of a record of, this is what we have, this is what we're doing, here is the current setup. Because keep in mind, this is still a point in time, but that point in time does help you alleviate a lot of the aspects that you're going to have to be dealing with. So it's helped us out a lot with the regulation piece. Next slide. So one of the effects I wanted to show you here, and actually I was hoping the graphic would work better, but understand in law enforcement and in security, we're looking at three things from a 360-degree aspect. So in my world, it's all about real-time situational awareness. So not only are we looking at it from an investigatory and forensic aspect, but also from a protection point. So where does digital twin or all that come into play? So again, we go back to that assessment. We go back to that understanding of, I have to make a record. I have to detail what things are going on, whether it be prior on a preventative measure or after in a forensic measure. I have to understand that environment. I have to see it, and using it digitally allows me to do that. So I'm able to actually pre-plan to a certain degree, but I'm also allowed to recover evidence. The pictures don't lie. As the saying goes, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, it's so true, because you're able to see and capture a lot of things that you normally wouldn't be able to do if you just say, what I used to do, take an advance of something, because you'd be relying on a camera picture, you'd be relying on a photo. What the 360 aspects of digital twin allows you to do is to see the entire aspect of your environment, and allows you to plan and prepare properly, as well as go back to forensics.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelly, Stewart. I think, that the picture never lies. And once you get into 3D with measurability and models, it just gives us so much more information that I think we can make good decisions and collaborate on a single source of data. So that's a good point. So we have a closing off. Jacob Atkins is a former police captain and FBI National Academy alumni. Jacob's going to give us a little bit of a perspective, especially when it's coming to on-campus events, event planning, pre-incident planning, and protests, and from a law enforcement perspective, what this means to us today. So, Jacob.
Thanks, Kelly. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Jacob Atkins, and I am an FBI National Academy graduate. That's where they send 900 people a year from all over the world to Quantico for 3 months. And one thing that I did when I was in law enforcement is I ran the specialized group who dealt with protests and large crowds, and I personally stood on more than 200 protests. Next slide, please. So just real quick, pre-incident planning for mass gatherings, mitigating risk, and incident command and disaster response. Many universities have dealt with what is shown in that picture, and then we also get to throw COVID-19 into the middle of it. So the more prepared we are and the more risk we can mitigate, the better off we will be. Next slide. So what can we plan for, and what can we do, and how can visualization help? Identifying pre-staging areas is the #1 thing to do when you're dealing with protests and mass gatherings. If you can identify pre-staging areas for protesters, counter-protesters, media, have a water station, even have EMS, that will help you immensely throughout the entire process. So how do you keep the two groups from interacting? And by two groups, I mean the protesters and the counter-protesters. If you pre-stage certain areas, it allows both sides to protest while not coming into contact with each other. When they come into contact with each other, that's when everything escalates. By setting up two different areas that can still hear and see each other but not physically interact, this gives the protest groups reasons to stay in the areas. Whichever group shows up first takes one of the areas, the other group gets the other. Both groups are more likely to stay in their areas when they know the watering station is nearby and the media is nearby and will be covering that area. You can't force people into the areas, but when you give them structure and a platform to voice their concerns, it's met more favorably than not. Media staging is important because when you give the media an area to park and let them know they're close to the protests, then the protest keeps close to the media to get their message heard. Water station is important because the last thing you need is someone passing out from heat on camera. Now, all of that, utilizing visualization allows all your parties ahead of time to know where they're supposed to be, how things are going to be set up, and it also gives people an idea before they get there, because when you have EMS show up, which is fire department, when you have your police, which should be attached to the colleges or sometimes facilities, but you'll have outside people, media will show up, and you never know who it's going to be. The more information you can give them ahead of time, the less they're walking around trying to figure out where they're supposed to go, and the more structured the entire event can become. EMS staging is important because heat exhaustion is one thing, depending on where you're at, is something that I dealt with a lot when you deal with protests, especially when you have lots of crowds that are right in next to each other and they're out there for a long period of time. All these areas are important and will help keep the protests as peaceful as possible. If you can send different entities like the fire department, police department, media, even your protest leaders, a quick link to show them, if you park over here and you walk over there, and then here's an area that's already set up for you so that you can go voice your concerns, it can help. Everyone could be provided with what they need to help mitigate the risk. This is what I would have done had I had this software back in what Stewart was talking about, back in the archaic days when you just showed up and made it happen because you didn't have this. Food for thought, managing a protest is a lot like managing a parade. It really is, because you're going to have different routes, you're going to have different things set up, but if you kind of use that same blueprint, That's what works the best. An overview of the incident command and incident response. Taking command of an incident is easier when you can see what's going on. With everybody staged up, you'll reduce the injuries, reduce the risk, and you'll look better on the news while you're doing it. Look at the photo over to the right. That was a staged photo. You can tell because everybody's standing tall with their shields, and pictures don't lie. So the sheriff in the middle who has their shield upside down will always have their shield upside down because they didn't bother to realize they were doing that before they took the picture. Having a photographic record of property and assets before anything else takes place. You don't want things to get out of control, but if something happens and some property is destroyed or something is, set on fire, whatever you want to say. Mohawk College talked about it earlier with that room that had all the millions of dollars of equipment. Having a photographic record of everything and what it looked before will give you a lot easier time when you're trying to deal with whatever insurance companies or whoever you're dealing with when you're trying to compare the before and after. Because remember, a picture doesn't lie. Kelly?
Thanks, Jacob. And we're going to kind of wrap this up now. Everyone's had a moment to kind of give us their perspective, and I hope the audience has gained something from this webinar. I think, when it comes down to it, there are various technologies out there, from LiDAR to drones to working with BIM models and CAD. And I think where we're going as a company is to bring all those assets into a single place where they can be accessed intuitively from a platform that's easy to use, and that we can get a lot more people on the same page to be able to share this information with our service providers and facilities, with our law enforcement professionals. And one of the commitments we made to all our customers is that any of our customers that scan a building, we provide free access to police, fire, emergency management teams so that the visualization doesn't stop at the facility. So in wrapping up, we have a few resources. Richard has a really interesting program. They do take on partnerships and projects. So if there's some interest to reach out to Richard, please do so. Kelly Stewart has a great resource center and newsletter that he sends out. So this presentation will be sent to everyone on the registration, and it will be sent by email so that you can review it and click on the links. And then from our perspective, if you're interested to learn more about our platform, please reach out and schedule a meeting or a demonstration with us, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. Now, Brett, can we kind of go a little bit and ask some of the questions? So yes, the meeting has been recorded, and yes, both the meeting recording and the PowerPoint will be sent to everyone that has registered for this event, so that you'll be able to access it at a later time. Brett, do we have any other questions that we want to tackle, or any questions maybe for the panel?
At this time, Kelly, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to actually step in here. Adam, I'm not sure. One of my students actually emailed me some questions about this webinar. His name is Adam. I'm not sure if he is connected to audio.
Can you find an Adam in the audience?
I do, and he is not connected to audio.
Okay,
but
so
he could always.
I can pose the questions on his behalf, and he's actually addressed one that we hear very, very frequently in in industry here, especially here in Canada. Any sort of estimating, any sort of project design, any sort of engineering documentation that happens, it's almost always ends up being that we have to revert back to the CAD files, the Revit file, not even the Revit file, the CAD files, the drawings that are governing the design. And the reason for that seems to be that in the legal documentation, the drawings, the blueprints, if you will, for the old days are what governs the design. Does anyone in the audience or even on the panel have any comments as to how we work to shift that to permit the BIM model to actually govern the design, and whether or not that needs to occur at a contractual stage?
Mark, do you think this might be a topic for you to approach here from your perspective? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, Kelly. You are right that the drawings are generally have been the one in the past that has taken precedence. However, at Ohio State, we are telling designers to go in and take a look at what's there. So they aren't allowed to just rely on existing CAD drawings. And as we give them a model, we of course have to put our disclaimer on the model of, well, this is about where it is, but things aren't exact. You need to go in and field verify as an architect or an engineer. But now you can at least see, do you have a conflict in certain areas or not? So I think visual plan is going to be another step in that direction of, well, here's the visual plan view of what's there. So the architects and engineers can rely on that. How that will play out in case law, that'll be an interesting one. But I think if the information's there, case law and juries and judges are going to say, you had the information, you just chose not to use it. So it's going to be on the architect and the engineer.
Actually, if I can jump in and answer some of that, Kelly.
Go ahead.
I know that it all depends, at least here in the United States, and some aspects, and I am only familiar with Canada from the Ontario aspect, is I know that they're looking more and more heavily on how BIM is used because of its preciseness, because of its version control, and those aspects. I know it's been used with some of the architectural and engineering firms in this country when you go into case law, just because the outdatedness and sometimes just not keeping up with the drawings. I mean, I've gone on several projects with several clients when they've jumped into the rat hole of compliance, and the as-built drawings don't match up because nothing was kept up to date during the process of the project. So that does come into, it depends on where you are in the country on that, because there's early adoption of this by some firms. And if you go out to the West Coast where you'd think it'd be more prevalent, it's not actually. So it's, I agree with Mark, it'll be a wait and see, but there is adoption and there will be case law on this based upon, just because of preciseness.
That's a great answer. Thanks for everyone to comment on that. And even from my perspective on a recent project, it was quite interesting. We had a small area, space that was a complicated area to get to. It was laser scanned. It was BIM modeled by two different groups. We actually created a BIM model strictly from the visualization without any point clouds, just using the structural diagram. So we can create a 3D model based on a visual representation from an asset management perspective, not as a verified as-built. And then the point cloud was modeled. And what I thought was really tremendously interesting as I started to deeply look into the BIM on both, there were things that were omitted from each of those modelers who did not capture every single detail 100% accurate. And that simply is the fact that we have humans involved with that aspect. The rich data behind the properties is absolutely invaluable. It's not easy to access from spreadsheets and documents, but the one thing that remained statically true was the imagery or the point cloud. And because those measurements and because that imagery was basically a frozen copy at that point in time, a digital twin, if you will, it's not created. It is captured. It is that kind of sense of truth, and it can be relied on to guide us through the process. But I guess there's going to be a lot of we're going to have to understand how we can use that information in a legal context as well. Thanks for that. Any other questions so far? I know we're 5 minutes past the 60-minute mark, but I want to make sure we address anything if there's anything pending. And if not, I want to thank everyone for attending. We are going to be having another presentation next month, and I would strongly encourage you to sign up for this one. It'll be October 14th at the same time. and it's on the intelligent manufacturing environment and how digital twins are playing a role in prevention planning. And we have a really high-level speaker from Santa Fe, which is one of the leading pharmaceutical companies globally, and they've been tasked to manage the vaccine for COVID. So they also have one of the most innovative manufacturing locations in the world out of Boston. So we're going to have some really interesting conversations there. Jag Mukha is the CTO of an IoT company. So we're going to be talking about kind of the fourth industrial revolution and how real-time sensor data, real-time information can be fed into a digital twin and how that's helping various stakeholders. We'll always get our perspective from a security expert. So we'll have Kelly Stewart again on the call, which will be very helpful, and that'll be great. And it looks like we did get a last comment here. And I'm just going to read this one out. Thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting webinar. Just a quick introduction. We are a laser scan to BIM service provider in Vancouver with lots of 2D, 3D Revit as built modeling. Would love to talk to anyone interested in our services. So I can basically just mention that there are a lot of people that are working in this space of 3D, and if you're not currently there, reach out to Visual Plan. We have a lot of customers and contacts throughout the country. I'd be happy to put you together with someone that is either working with our platform or with BIM or 360 scanning and help you with that kind of transition, that digitization. Thank you everyone for attending.